Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Alicia and DVSA, for inviting me to do this talk. This is very exciting. So, yeah, thank you all for coming out. This is great. So, first of all, to get started, being asked to do an artist talk, I think, oh, how am I? Where do you start? How do you organize this? How do I organize this? But then I was thinking, I'm always interested in artists and the artist's journey, where artists start at one spot and then they end up over here. And then there's all this stuff in between, right? So I thought, okay, well, let's start there. So yeah, you have to start somewhere. So Sean, first image. Okay, so what is this? What are we looking at? This looks like something from, New York or Montreal, 1950s, 1940s. Like, what is happening? Well, it's actually Ancaster, 1995. It's true. Redeemer College. I graduated there with a degree in English and art, and this is from my graduating exhibit. And so what I had done these abstract paintings, and they were actually diptychs. So there was a painting with a photograph. So the painting was inspired from, the photograph. The photograph provided the source material. So this is actually based on corn, sort of like dead husks of corn in my family's cornfield at the time. So, the palette knife, oil paint, oil on canvas. And at the time, I was really fascinated with abstract expressionism, with this idea that paint can be expressive or be emotive. So 1995. Okay, so then next image. Okay, so what is this? So this is many years later at my graduate exhibit here at Dundas Valley School of Art. And this is from 2009. So a bit different from the first image. So first of all, why did I come to DVSA? I think, well, first of all, after Redeemer, did a lot of different things. I really found out that I discovered that I was searching for my artist voice. I was lacking direction. And then, I knew about this school. And then, speaking to John Wilkinson, who was in charge of the independent study program at the time, he said, it's really difficult for artists to find their voice by themselves. Sometimes you need to go to school. You need some more instruction. So I came here. And this is from my final exhibit. And then I'm a student here, and I'm doing all these exercises, and then I realized that a lot of my exercises, a lot of the things the source material that I was drawn to was actually, sort of things from my childhood, from the farmhouse that I grew up in. Like the tin ceilings or the china in my mom's china cabinet, things like that. And then it was Susan Detweiler, who was an instructor here, and she introduced me to this group of pattern and decoration. The pattern and decoration movement, which was something that happened, 70s and 80s, New York City and the West Coast. And that was really eye-opening, because then I realized, oh, wow, there's like all these other people who are sort of doing the same thing, taking things, from their childhood or from secondhand stores, working with pattern, decorative motifs and things like that. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. So then the next image. So it's actually a triptych. And there's a second one. So these were based on little scraps of wallpaper that I found. And then, I sort of blew them up. They're, I think 24 by 36. Oil on canvas. I even stretched the canvas. So So that was from 2009. The final, graduating exhibit. Okay, so then next image. So you can see the influence of pattern and decoration. This is from a show at Transit Gallery on Locke Street. Pretty Colley and David Brace. I think they were quite influential in the art scene, sort of the burgeoning Hamilton art scene. And this is a show I did with Andrew McVeigh. Andrew's here today. Just wave, Andrew. He invited me to do this show about painting. Yeah, so I did these little, they're 9 by 12, oil on wood panel. And I was really fascinated with this certain pattern called Biedermeier pattern from the 1800s, Europe. And and in the foreground, I put birds. There's another image shown. So actually, I was living with my mom at the time, and I was just thinking about all the birds that visited our bird feeder. So that was sort of the inspiration for this show. Yeah, so that was 2010, and now next image. It's like, oh, what's this? This is something a bit different. So this is from 2014. It's oil on canvas. And at the time, I was kind of thinking about, well, what to do next. I don't know. But then again, it goes back to my childhood, because when I was a boy, I would always draw, and I would always draw women. And I didn't know why for the longest time. I thought I was going to be a fashion designer, but alas, no. But anyways, trying to figure out what to do. So then the women are from I think they're from an ad in Vogue or something. Because I thought, well, why don't I tap into that sort of childhood thing of women and fashion? And then, it took me a while when I figured out that really, when I was a kid, I was really influenced by my sisters and by my mom. And that sort of came out through the art that I was making when I was a kid. And then there's also this influence of the Matisse. Matisse, The Red Studio, is one of my favorite paintings. It's at the MoMA. And that's me just kind of, ripping it off a bit. I mean, let's face it. In the background. Yeah, and so I did a series of these. It wasn't for any show. It was really for my own amusement. The only reason why I have a photograph of it is because Sean and his partner Danny have it. Okay, next image. Okay, so this is, back to the flowers and things. So, this is from a pattern of flowers. It's oil on wood panel. And this is from the first show at the $100 Gallery. So what is $100 Gallery? So $100 Gallery was this idea that Andrew and I came up with. Andrew there, yes. Because we were thinking, well, wouldn't it be funny if there was a gallery that was like a dollar store version of gallery, a dollar store for art? What would that be? So we came up with $100 Gallery. So we'd sell work for $100. And what would you do? What kind of art would you make for $100? So at the beginning, we were going to do it in Andrew's studio above Mixed Media on Cannon and James Street downtown. But then Dave, who's the landlord, was like, oh, why don't you guys wait? He suggested that we wait and maybe there would be a storefront available. We're like, all right. So that's what happened. It was a bit, we weren't really expecting to do this, but it just kind of happened and we went with it. And alas, $100 Gallery was born. So this is from our first show. And the first show I did I partnered with a friend of mine, Andrea Vanderkoy, another Redeemer graduate. So next image. And again, this is from some pattern. So this is installation shot. This is $100 Gallery. Now, so this is our final show. So we were there for a year and a little bit. And Andrew and I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny? We've been selling this work for $100. Why don't we do an expensive show? Work that costs more than $100. So I did these pieces. These are 3 by 3, 3 feet by 3 feet. It's oil on paper. And, speaking of expensive, I was looking at Hermes scarves. So sort of getting into that, tying that fashion thing together. So these are all based on Hermes scarves. So I did a whole bunch of these. And then, the next one. So, that was a fun source material to work with. And the next one. So this is an installation shot from the same show. And this is at the back of the, above the stairs is a little space. So this is showing my work with Andrew McPhail's, the end, using his sequin. And what was funny is that we worked with sizes, 24 by 24. I mean, we didn't really plan to do this. It just kind of worked out. The imagery that I was using was China patterns based on things that I saw at the British Museum, because I got to go to London that year, I think. So that was exciting. Yeah. Okay. So this is, because while I'm always doing these things, I'm doing a lot of oil on paper pieces, because actually it's something that I started doing here, because working on paper was just really easy. You didn't think it was too precious. You could experiment without putting in the expense. So I just kept doing that. So, and this is from a show that, from the Central Library. So where they display their artwork, and there is like this big glass encased glass display unit. And I had a bunch of these, and I hung them all together. I think there's another one. So there was about, 15 all together. It almost looked like one piece, like one installation piece. So what's next? Okay, so this is an installation shot of my first show at the Assembly Gallery. So what had happened, so $100 gallery lasted for about a year or so, and then it was actually Andrea Carvalho came to us, Andrew and I, and said, "Oh, hey, I have me and Dan Gibbons and Nancy Ann McPhee. We're thinking of starting an artist collective. Do you want to be a part of that?" And we're like, "Sure, let's do that." So, thankfully, Dave, our landlord, Dave and Teresa, they were on board with that too. So it was like, okay, so that's how the assembly started. And this is my first exhibit. So much larger, the pieces are much larger. They're unstretched canvas, because I thought, I've been doing all these little things, so let's take the challenge and do something large. So the next slide, next image. So what I think was kind of interesting is that it's sort of becoming this strange hybrid space of, it's a landscape, but does this landscape exist? It's sort of like, it's because there is a flattening and also, this sort of pattern thing going on. So, but I kind of like that. It's like this weird space. But anyways, next image, and another one. And I think I called this show Another Spring, because it was always something that my mom would say before she passed away. She'd get through the winter, and every spring she would say, "Oh, I'm so glad to get to another spring," because winters were hard for her. So so again, the same show, and again, working on this great paper, 3 feet by 3 feet, which I can't find anymore, which is a bummer. But again, oil on paper. And again, this imagery, it looks like a pattern, but it's actually a photo that I took of these flowers at Home Depot. You know how they're on trays? I mean, it's a pattern right there. So, yeah. So the next one, please. Yeah, and sort of the same thing. I think these are flowers, real flowers, but they're in this unreal space, pattern space. And then there's the next one. Oh, yeah. So these are succulents and cacti from the Royal Botanical Gardens, just over here in Burlington. Yeah, from their Mediterranean garden. So I love the shape of these. You will be seeing these again in this talk. But yeah, anyway, next one. Okay, so this is my second show at the assembly, and so yeah, next one. So what had happened was I went to Bath in the UK. I met up with Andrew and his partner Rod, and we stayed in this old house that was owned by this woman, Philippa Savory. And Andrew said, "Oh, you should pretend you're doing a residency here." And I said, "Oh, okay." Because that's how these things go, right? It's like, oh, sure, why not? So all of these paintings are based on textiles or fabric or wallpaper that was found in this, sort of restored old house. Or they were also patterns that I saw around town as well. So sort of this, Victorian, Edwardian thing going on. So I did all these paintings, and then we sort of becomes an installation, sort of like this salon-style installation. And then I had invited Jessica, I forget her last name, and her friend Jessica Gale, and they came and they did this. If you could go back a bit, Sean. So they did this kind of curious floral installation as well for the window, just to sort of add bring the real flowers in. So yeah, so go ahead. Yeah, and this is another piece from that show. So it's oil on unstretched canvas, and this is based on a piece of wallpaper that we found up in the attic. We weren't supposed to go up there, but Rod found the key, and yeah, and it had this paper. Maybe it was from the 1940s, 1950s. I'm not quite sure, but sort of like this faux medieval thing going on. But I thought it was fascinating, and I took a ton of pictures. So yeah, and it became a painting. Yeah, and again, this was, I think this was from their textiles, from their curtains, actually. But yeah. Okay, so now this is 2018, and this is from a show I did over here at the Carnegie Gallery. I called it In Bloom, and so these were all based on my trips to the to the RBG. So yeah, what I thought was interesting, like I wanted to use real live plants as the source material. But then it's kind of interesting because then it sort of becomes, I don't know, just the way I work, it just becomes a pattern, which I thought was kind of curious. So yeah, so there were 3 of them. And again, 3 foot by 3 foot canvases. Sometimes Relay Coffee over on King William downtown. They have a couple of them, and sometimes they show them. Yeah, but that's always nice. Yeah, some smaller work. So yeah. So that's the In Bloom. Okay, so what is this? This is something a little different. But in 2018 or 2019, I did this exhibit at Montgomery Inn, which is one of the oldest inns here in Upper Canada, in Etobicoke, so off of Highway 5. So I did this intervention. So I found all this source material, a lot of it from Dundurn Castle and also Whitehern here in Hamilton, and I used all of the, I found all the decorative elements, all the patterns and things from those places, because and that's how that show started. And then, so this is sort of this long landscape sort of canvas. And it's, so next one. So a lot of this is from textiles or wallpaper from White Hern. And the next one. And I kind of painted them a little differently too. But anyways, just with wet on wet, which was kind of interesting, gives it a softer feel. I don't know. So the next one, Sean. Okay, so this is something a bit different. This is a screen print, which was very exciting to do. So just to go back a little bit, while we were doing $100 Gallery, we collaborated with Lane Groneweg at Smokestack Studios here in Hamilton. And because he wanted to do something with us, and we're like, oh, okay. So we did the Offcuts show. And that was a show where we invited artists who don't usually work in printmaking, and we used offcuts of materials that they had at the studio. So we did that 2 years. And then after that, I think in the second show, I did screen printing, which I thought was very exciting. So for this is for a show at the Assembly in 2019 or 2020. Well, I don't know. But I thought, I want to do screen printing again because it's very exciting. And I love the layers of this because you can do these, these thin layers. And I love this. You can't really see it. It looks sort of ochre. It's actually gold, which was really cool. And they're 11 by 14. So the next one. So this is also from that same show. So what had happened was, we do these prints, and then when we would finish, we would just sort of take up the screen print and just slap it down on paper randomly and run the ink through. This was actually Lane's idea. So you end up with this sort of random composition of flowers, which I thought was really cool. And it's also larger sheets of paper too. So that was fun. So this is from that same exhibit. I think I called it Pretty Things, and I was really obsessed with doing paintings with a black background, which maybe that ties into like a Dutch still life thing, but and also I just love finding patterns anywhere. Like this is from my IKEA bedspread, which I got a lot of work out of that bedspread, I have to tell you. So, okay, so this is much different. What is happening here? So this is 2022, and so as you've seen, I've been working a lot on oil on paper, right? And I just love working with that. So after a while, and especially if you're an artist, you will know that things start to pile up. So I was looking at this pile of paintings thinking, okay, well, what do I do with this? A bonfire? I don't know. But I thought, how do I recycle them? Because, let's try doing that. So I thought, well, let's start cutting them up and making a collage out of them. That makes sense. And so I started doing that. And I thought, well, that's kind of, I'm not excited about that. But then I started to just tack them up on my studio wall. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then, you just start tacking more things up on the wall. And then suddenly it becomes a thing. And I thought, oh, that's curious. Maybe I could do something with this for the assembly show. So and I love how these small things, you keep making them and then you keep adding them and then it becomes something bigger. That was very exciting. And then, it could just keep going, which I thought was really interesting. So the next image Oh, right. I almost forgot about this. Yes. So okay, who is this person? What is happening? So while I'm making this, ridiculous landscape, I was thinking, what kind of person would inhabit this landscape? And then I thought, oh, why don't, I like the challenge of this idea of creating something, not something new. What kind of costume would this person wear? How would I do that? So, yeah, it's sort of this Rococo crazy fantasy. But then, yeah, so how do I do that? Well, thankfully, one thing I learned from RuPaul's Drag Race, some of you might know, is the power of a glue gun. So, right? So that's what I did. I know how to use a glue gun. So again, this jacket, if you go to the next one, so it's really just oil on canvas, old oil on canvas paintings that I just cut up and I just attached to this old suit jacket. Even the mask is oil on canvas. And then, the idea of the person and the costume just sort of grew from there. And then I had help from my friend Danny, who helped out with the bit of makeup and some styling. So that was really fun to do. And also, a bit of a challenge and it was a surprise too, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I think I wanted to surprise myself too. And it was certainly a surprise on the day of the opening because nobody really knew I was going to do this. So that really added an element of, oh, what is he doing? But it was fun to do. So next image. Right, so this is the whole Frolic Arch installation, reimagined on this giant trellis at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. So what had happened was Toby Bruce and Melissa Bennett, who always come out to my shows and, Assembly and $100 Gallery, they've always been supportive of our endeavors. They came to see to see the Frolic show, and Toby said, "Oh, I'm doing this show in September, a group show, and I needed something at the opening, and this Frolic Arch thing would be perfect. Let's reimagine it for the gallery." And I said, "Sure, let's do that." But then, how would that look? What would you do? So it was actually Greg Daw who came up with the idea of a trellis. And I said, yes, a trellis, because it keeps that sort of garden vibe going. So he created this trellis, and then, so the next image. So you have two sides to it. So it was all that work, all those cuttings and things and ribbons from that archway, sort of reimagined on this trellis. And then I had the idea, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool to do like two-sided flowers that you could hang throughout the gallery? I didn't know. Ideas are cheap, right? Like, you don't know what's going to work. And then Toby said, yes, do that. I was like, all right, I guess I have to do it. So did a whole bunch of these flowers, and then she actually hung them through here, and then we hung them throughout the gallery, which was really cool, sort of tied everything together. So this was a really great opportunity, and that was really fun to do. Okay, so the next image, just a different angle. Made the large flowers, made some other flowers to go on the wall. And then the next image, I made these jars. Again, going back to the British Museum that I found these jars. Sometimes I think when you get a show to do, when somebody invites you to do a show, you have an opportunity to do something new. So like, let's do this. The next image, just a detail. again, everything's sort of recurring, recycling. Yeah. And I think that is something that holds my work together too. Everything gets recycled. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but this is what I'm working with. So yeah, so this is a detail. Again, colored pencil. I love working with colored pencils from a toile pattern. Yeah. Oh, those jars. And those weed things it's oil on mylar, and I love working on mylar. So that's fun to do. Okay, so this is from this past March, actually, at the Assembly Gallery. Yeah, because I was thinking, I didn't have as big a turnaround time to do something, but I thought, oh, what am I going to do? But again, I got obsessed about the plants at the RBG, in their Mediterranean garden. And I think a lot of artists just get obsessed about things. I think that's really how it operates. Because I got obsessed about these plants, a lot of succulents and cacti and things. Yeah, and then, again, the oil on paper, finding these large sheets of paper, next image. And then, yeah, so again, doing this idea, I wanted to do the idea of an installation again. But how was I going to do that? Did I want to do that whole frolic thing and cutting things out? I didn't want to do that. It takes a lot of time. Who has time for that? So, but, let's do something else. So, again, I found these large sheets of paper, thanks to Dave at Mixed Media. I will give him a shout out. But I couldn't fit it all in one photo because it's actually 16 feet long. And then what I would do, the next image. So yeah, this is from that installation. And what I would do, I had room in my studio for about 3 or 4 of these sheets. So I could only work on 3 or 4 at a time. So I really didn't know what it was going to look like until it went up in the gallery. But I think that's kind of interesting too. This sort of, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like, but let's go. I'm sure it'll work out. Fingers crossed. Anyway, so yeah, oil on paper, and then the next one. So yeah, and I just love these shapes of these weird plants, and and all these sharp edges. And then these people started to show up. I don't know on your right hand side. These sort of weird leafy people, and I thought, I don't know who they are. Are they aliens? Are they from the ground? But I thought it would be interesting to put some kind of person in the installation, because then it creates a narrative, which was something a bit different. So yeah, so next one. Right, so this is, again, using the succulents and things and oil on canvas, and I thought I wanted something big, but how do you do that? How do you do that so it'll fit in the car? Because you have to think about these practical things, right? So I did, so I just got 2 of these canvases. I think they're 24 by 36. I just kind of stuck them together, and then, and that becomes one. So that was this past March. So yeah, I think that's it. I hope that's the last image. So that's it. I did want to say, going back to the trellis at the AGH, we're going to reuse that again for a show coming up in Cambridge at the Preston Gallery next year. So yeah, that'll be fun to reuse. But anyway, so that's it. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions, I guess? Or if you don't, that's okay. We can...
Yeah, I was just wondering, how the colors, with Johnny, the blue, and how do you figure that out?
Oh, yeah. So I usually start with the source material. And I get inspired from that. But then doing the exact, like the local color, the exact color, it's kind of boring to me. So like this plant here on the left had a bluish, greenish tinge, but then I thought, well, I'm just going to start playing with it and come up with my own kind of color. So it starts with the source material, but then I just kind of make it into something else, I guess. I don't really, that's the best explanation I can give you. Yes, Jody.
Thank you. It was really wonderful show and talk. I appreciate it. How do you, and I hate asking technical questions because I feel like it's the biggest compliment. Anyway, do you prepare your paper in any way before you mount it in the oil?
Oh, sometimes. Because if, going back to some of those, like to those Hermes scarves and things, I would just use an ochre wash. Just like I wouldn't prime it at all because I really like that effect of the paint kind of soaking in, so it kind of looks a bit different. But then, and then this assembly show, I didn't do anything. I just painted right on it, so you get that white. So it's just white in the background.
So it's oil paint on paper, yes. No gesso, no medium, no anything underneath, or?
That is correct. Yes. And again.
Do you have any archival concerns? I hate when I get asked that too because I just want. But anyway, the tradition is like don't do that because it will rot the paper.
Right. Yeah, and there actually is paper for oil paint.
Yeah, but is that what you're using?
Absolutely not. No. No, because that paper has a certain texture to it, and it is awful. Okay, but back to the archival aspect to it, there's a lot of artists, you can go back to the Renaissance or even Rembrandt. He did oil on paper, right? So that has lasted. Not to say that my work is going to end up in the Rijksmuseum fully under glass, or in a vault or what have you. But then, I don't know, sometimes you just have to say, who cares? Maybe by the time this rots, I'm not going to be around, so who's going to care? But also, it actually lasts quite a long time, right? So because I still have a lot of these.
Or you're going to cut it up.
Or I'm going to cut it up. Exactly. That's right, yeah.
And what about the physicality of pushing it's hard pushing the oil across the paper.
Yeah, it is, because it's always absorbing, right? But also there are different kinds of paper you can use, right? Like there is this Maya paper, Clairefontaine, which has a hard surface, so the paint stays on the surface more. But then if you get into some cheaper paper, it'll just sink right in. So it's a matter really of finding your materials, the right materials. So yeah.
It's quite a bit of work. I mean, I tried it. You have to really push that.
It's true, yes. Oh.
Stephen, I wanted to ask you about your presentation in the sense of most of what you've shown us, you've traditionally through the years painted on a rectangle or a square.
Yeah.
Did you find the process of cutting up the paintings or drawings and re-presenting them in a more three-dimensional way a challenge, a freedom? What can you maybe talk about that?
Oh yeah, I thought it was. I think there was some freedom to that. I really liked the idea of the paintings starting to come off the wall. And I was thinking of different artists, like Patrick Cruz did a whole show of, throwing paintings on the floor where you would walk on them, which I thought was shocking. But yeah, there is a freedom to it, I think. Yeah. And it's interesting how people engage with it differently as well. As soon as you cut something up and it hangs differently, it's perceived differently too. I think that's really interesting. So yeah, it was a very freeing thing. You kind of have to let go of a lot of things.
So part of the reason I asked the question is because I know with the rectangle and the square that basically you're dealing with a boundary.
Yes, yeah.
And so I'm sure as you are painting and composing that, the one that's in front of us, for example, you might choose to have that blue cactus a little more to the left because it's close to the edge and that sort of thing. Whereas if you're making the sculptural thing, to me, you maybe lose that restriction.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because when you're painting on your canvas or your paper, you're thinking of, you think of composition, right? But then when you're making these things, these installation pieces, you can go with the size of the wall or whatever room you're working with, right? Like it becomes site specific. So yeah, so it is very much different in that way. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Alicia?
In the beginning of your talk, it was funny because you were like, I thought I was going to be a fashion designer. That didn't happen, but then we saw the suit later, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Would you go back into like playing around with that, like making pieces?
Yes. For example, that suit, was just one, like that was sort of a one-off, but then, it's a whole different brain thing that you have to use to do that. And so I would like to do it again. Maybe I will. But it's like the paintings come first, and that sort of fashion, creating the suit is something that is secondary for me. Maybe that will change. I don't know. But I hadn't connected it in that way before. So yeah, so thank you. Sally? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having a little, forget what my question is exactly.
Sure, well, you just start.
I think, this is great, thank you so much. It's fantastic work, great talk. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about your relationship to your subject matter.
Sure.
And I could just leave it at that, and then maybe I might have a follow-up question for it if you want.
Was there something specific about
Well, okay, I'll say a little more. So it just, like, when you started, you were like, it's going to be like all over the place. And like the work is, a lot of the works are very different from each other. So there's this consistency, it seems like, in the material that you're drawing from. And like even like thinking about working with the sort of antique wallpapers or objects in the British Museum or even the Royal Botanical Gardens where everything is sort of ornamentally cultivated as a kind of English cultivated kind of like thing there. So I'm curious about your interest in that, where that goes, but then also thinking about students, like how hard it is to kind of find sometimes the content that's going to keep you sustained and keep challenging you, and like sort of how you came to this, like, because it seems like you're like completely on a roll. You're never short for ideas of what to do. Like if it feels like it's feeding you, whatever this thing is.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's this childhood thing that I was something, pattern, decoration, ornamental things that I was really fascinated by as a kid. And I think that sort of is this sort of childhood obsession that I guess I haven't grown out of. But, it's like, well, okay, well, we'll just go with it, right? But then, when I was a student here, Susan Detweiler said, artists usually work with one theme throughout their entire life and through their entire career. And that was kind of eye-opening because then, you don't have to scramble around all the time for different things. You just, you focus. And I thought, that's a really interesting, to have that parameter. And then when you're doing this one thing, there's all kinds of other things that come out, right? So maybe that's how I think about it. So maybe that answers your question. I don't know. But sometimes I don't even know. I don't know. Like I said, sometimes artists are just obsessives, right? And you just get into your thing and you just go with it.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
So like you're at the British Museum,
Yeah.
which is full of stuff,
All kinds of stuff, yes.
right? But you end up with the China place, or you end up
Yeah.
so what's happening in the museum while you're like what is it that calls you there to that?
I wonder if it's a bit of, there's some familiarity with it, right? Because while, yes, these are precious objects in a museum, they kind of resemble maybe, the precious object in my mom's china cabinet, right? Like it is kind of almost the same thing in a way. And also, I don't know, that catches my eye, right? And I don't know, there is a connection that I make there. I'm not sure if I can explain it. That's the best I can do. Yeah.
Just follow up on Sam's question, because the choice you made in the museum. When you are receiving that object, would you consider it's just as a visual as an object, or would you consider its colonial history that carried that object, especially with the museum, this kind of like very specific institutional power?
Sure, yeah. I do think about that. I think for me, what I think about sometimes is this sort of, I grew up on a farm, so I'm always considering these ideas of perception of farmers and peasants, right? And there's a romanticism, especially with the toile and things. And yet, I grew up on a farm. It's not terribly romantic. So but I don't know if that answers your question, but that's,
I have another question, not related to the previous one. I find it quite interesting when I find the part is really a painting and drawing, like 2D based. When you're showing the photo of the one that you cutting out your paintings, making into cloth kind of installation, and also wearing them as a performance kind of like piece. And you briefly mentioned you said you find certain kind of freedom in that kind of format, breaking out that rectangle frame. You can, with that kind of freedom that you have experienced, do you consider to going out of this disciplinary of like doing painting, or if you still choose to focus on painting, and what's the reason for you to focusing on your practice on painting with your experience already finding the freedom in other format of like visual art, the expression?
all right, I'm sorry, I didn't, what's the question? I didn't really find the question in there.
Sorry, just wondering, since you already find certain kind of more freedom with other format like installation, which kind of acknowledge the materiality of the paper painting, and wearing them as costume, doing performance. Since I find you probably still see painting as your primary practice, can you tell us a little bit more of what are the reasons that make you still stay in painting?
Oh, okay. I think it's the materiality. You know, I love the, I love working with the paint. There's something about that. You know, it has a long history, painting does, but, you know, I can't get away from it either. You know, I do other things like the screen printing or the drawing, but there's something very satisfying about the oil paints and brushes. Yeah.
Smell.
There's the smell as well, yes.
Well, there's a lot to explore even within painting, like just the idea of painting, like you've explored all different things within painting even, you know, so there's a lot to learn there even.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's it as well. I mean, you're right, it just keeps kind of going. I can grow with it, right? You know, and I've been working a lot this past summer with acrylic paints, which has been kind of fun too. So, you know, it is a lot of oil, but I don't know, yeah, there's always, it just keeps going.
Can you
Yeah,
talk about
Maureen.
what you're working on now or in the near future?
Yes, I'm working on an installation piece, which I'm very excited about, for the Cambridge Gallery, Preston Gallery, for next spring. So yeah, like I said, we will be reusing that archway, the trellis, the giant trellis, but it will be used in a different way, which I think is kind of interesting. Sort of like this recycling of things, but to make something new. So yeah, so that's what I've been working on. So I hope you'll make the drive out, Maureen.
You're going to be cutting.
Yes. So just making lots of stuff, cutting it up, and becoming something different. I think there's going to be a larger scale of things, which is sort of interesting. Yeah, things are getting a little bigger. So, yeah.
Are there new paintings in that, or are you recycling?
It's a lot of new things. Yes, there might be some old things as well, but it's mostly something, new stuff. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sally.
So it was so great. Like I kept jotting down little notes, thinking about students again. You made so many in this talk, so many references, art historical references, the references to other painters or other like genres. Like that's still like you mentioned Rococo, and you mentioned Matisse, and like all of these different things coming in. Are you like spending a lot of time studying art history along with your practice, or is it something you absorb? Like how did this knowledge improve?
I really love art history. So it was something that I enjoyed in school, and it's something that I just continue, sort of absorbing, right? So I really do love art history, and I love going to galleries and museums and seeing old stuff and new stuff. So yeah, and I think getting out and seeing stuff is very important because it's fulfilling, but it also kind of spurs you on as well. So yeah. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions about working with oil on paper.
Sure.
Do you ever, like when you're painting with oil on paper, do you ever run into like wrinkling with stuff? Like how do you dry your work? How long does it take to dry?
Right. So the paper that I use is usually is a bit thicker, and it has a harder surface, so it actually doesn't wrinkle. But I'm also not throwing a lot of liquid. Like I'm not doing a lot of big washes with it either. So maybe that has something to do with it. But no, it doesn't. If you get the right paper, it won't. It shouldn't wrinkle or anything. Yeah.
Do you, when you cut up, when you do the collage sort of thing, is that all like exclusively like kind of leftover work, or do you make things? Do you make new paintings with the intent on cutting them up?
So actually both. So that frolic arch piece, that was all done with stuff that had paintings that were just sitting there. And a lot of pieces that I didn't like. And a lot of pieces that I figure, oh, no one's going to see this. Nobody wants this. So I'll just start cutting it up. But now, for this, as I was saying, I have this exhibit coming up next year. It's like, oh, no, I have to do something new. So a lot of it is making things that will be cut up, which kind of makes me sad a little bit, because then I think, oh, I'm just going to cut this up. But then it's in the purpose for doing something, doing something new and exciting. So that it is a bit of a shift, to think. It's a shift in thinking, sort of. But then,
real collage doing it to cut it up.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's all the questions. I want to say thank you again, Stephen, for coming
Thank you.
doing your talk.
Well, thanks for having me.